Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ted Gardner, and I'm the interviewer here at the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And we're going to be talking with Thomas Carson Griffin this morning, World War II veteran of note. And our camera operator is Dennis Daly, who performs here wonderfully, part of the history department of the library, which is one of the best in the country, of course. And we're happy to have you with us again this morning, Tom. I'll call you Carson from time to time because you told us a story about that. Incidentally, he told me about a month ago, we were on a trip up to Dayton, and he said, you know, one of the big mistakes I made in my life was letting the Army designate me as Thomas C. Griffin. He said I was always called Carson. I like the name Carson. He said I should have stuck to my guns and insisted on their calling me Carson in the records. So anyway, that's the way it goes, and I've known Tom for a long time, and I've heard him, I've been with him many times, and been honored to be in his presence. Tom, where were you born?
Green Bay, Wisconsin.
What, Tom?
Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Green Bay. Oh my gosh, up there on the thumb.
Yes.
Yeah, right there.
In 1916.
1916. Holy cow, you got 91, number 91 coming up pretty soon.
Yep.
Very, very wonderful. Well, what kind of a family did you have? Did you have brothers and sisters?
Yes, I had. I was the youngest of 6. I had 4 sisters and a brother.
Oh my goodness.
And at the present time, one of my sisters is the only one left of my...
Of your siblings?
Yeah.
How about that? Well, that's very, very interesting. What did your family do? Was your father...
My father worked in a bank in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Okay.
He had moved the family up there from Chicago about 7 or 8 years before my mother passed away, and then he moved the family back down. When I was 6 years old, moved us back to Chicago.
So your mother died when you were very young?
6 years old.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh, gee, that was sad.
In those days, if you went in for an operation, you were in big trouble. She had to have a gallstone operation, and she died.
Never came out of it.
Gallstone operation. It's almost an outpatient.
That would have been taken care of. That would have been taken care of today so easily and
almost outpatient.
Yeah. Oh yes, I should say. Well, where did you go to school? Elementary school.
I started in kindergarten and first grade in Green Bay, and then when I went back to Chicago, I started in, I think, about second grade.
Very good. Very good.
Went to grammar school in Chicago and high school, Hyde Park High School in Chicago.
Hyde Park High School. I'll be darned. Yep. And that's right in the city, isn't it?
Oh yes, that's right across from Jackson Park in the south side of the city.
Wonderful. Mm-hmm. Great place. Well, what did you do in high school? Did you have any particular interests in high school, hobbies or something?
When I was in high school, was in the depth of the Depression. I had the good fortune of getting a job with one of the store A&P grocery chain. I had an afternoon job from 3 o'clock till closing, and Saturday, all day Saturday.
Wow.
And I held on to that with grim death for months and months. Because if I didn't want that job, there was a line a block or two long that would take it in a minute.
Exactly.
So that's, and I saved all the money I made there. I was able to do that.
Wonderful.
Which wasn't an awful lot of money.
Do you remember what they paid you?
Yes. I took home a check of about $15 a week.
A week.
And that was for all kinds of hours.
Yes.
You worked until 6 or 7 when the store closed, and maybe up till 9 o'clock, and all day Saturday. Wow. Clean up till 2 in the morning. You were paid certain hours that you didn't work.
Wow.
That you weren't paid.
Well, that was, of course, that was a great experience. And as we old timers who grew up through the Depression like to say, well, it was character building. It was character building.
Is that what it was? I didn't like all that character
I know.
building, but
Who needs it?
yeah, that's too much character building.
Okay, then, so you graduated from high school about
In
1934?
In 1934, then I worked a year and went away to college in the fall of 1935.
And where did you go to
I
college?
went to the University of Alabama. My plan was to go away to school. I had enough money for a year.
Oh, yeah.
And I got down there, and I liked that school so much and everything about it that I stayed for 4 years. I managed to stay and graduate 4 years later.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, that's quite a switch from the Wolverine state to deep in the South. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that you had some very interesting experiences making new friends.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I had a wonderful time down there. And
Did they welcome you warmly as a Yankee?
oh, yes, there were many Yankees down there, actually. There were quite a few. I
Right.
wasn't alone.
Right.
A lot of them down there.
Right. Who was the coach at Alabama when you were
Frank
there?
Thomas.
Frank Thomas. That's
Frank
right.
Thomas was the coach at first.
Yeah.
Actually, my first year there, when I was a freshman, the famous coach was on the football team. What was his name?
Oh,
You know who I mean.
yeah. I just lost it. Yeah, I know who you mean. We'll think of it in a minute.
he
Very
went- he
famous.
went
He wore
on-
the checkered hat.
Yeah, checkered hat.
Sure. Oh gosh, yeah.
Bear Bryant.
Pardon?
Bear Bryant.
Bear
Bear
Bryant,
Bryant,
sure.
of
Thank
course.
you. Bear Bryant. How could we forget his name?
I don't know.
Yeah, he was actually the right end on the football team in my freshman year.
Oh, he
And
was.
you know what happened to him later.
Oh, yeah,
One of the
right.
great coaches.
And didn't he come from Texas? I'm
I
not
don't know
sure if
where he
was
came
out of
from.
Texas or not.
Oh,
I know
he
Frank
did
Thomas.
come. I think he came from Arkansas.
Arkansas. Okay,
Believe he
that's
did,
that's
yeah.
right. Well, so you had some wonderful years there at Bama
I did.
in Tuscaloosa,
Yes, indeed.
home of the Tuskers.
I had-
I never did find out why. Did you ever find out why they called it the Crimson Tide? It's kind of a
I
strange
think
name.
I knew at one time why they called it that, but
Yeah.
some writer once telling about the football team
Oh.
described them as the Crimson Tide,
Like
overrunning the opponents,
the
that sort of
strength
thing.
of the
yeah.
Tide. Oh,
And they
that's-
did a lot of that in those days in particular.
Sure, I'll
One of the
say.
great teams in the country.
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, that's wonderful. Well, what did you study in
I
Alabama?
majored in political science and minored in English and economics.
How about that?
My plan was to go 4 years to the regular, get an AB degree and go on to law school. But the war interrupted that.
War interrupted that. Okay, then along came the pre years of the war, and your interest in political science and history, of course. I'm sure you could, reading the headlines and listening to the radio news, you could foresee
Right.
what was coming ahead. How did you feel about that?
Well, I was in ROTC too. I
Oh, yeah.
graduated with a commission, second lieutenant's commission
Oh, I
in
see.
anti-aircraft and artillery, field
Right.
artillery.
Right.
But I didn't like that part of it, so I transferred into the Air Corps.
Oh,
You could
boy.
see the war coming.
Right, right.
War clouds were gathering.
So you graduated, what year did you graduate?
1939.
1939, and so where did you go from there? Did you go back to Michigan?
No, the first year I was up at Fort Sheridan, up
Oh, yeah.
on Lake Michigan.
Chicago.
ROTC officers went through a year of training there with the troops, and I spent a year there. Then I told them I wanted to transfer to the Air Corps,
Okay.
and I ended up down in Florida, southern Florida, Coral Gables, with Pan American Airlines, and they had 2 flying schools, old Commodore aircraft, where they took students. They had them made up into classrooms that would accommodate, for example, 6 navigators with their desks and equipment, and we flew around the Caribbean in that area to learn that trade. We went to classes at the University of Miami, there at Coral Gables, for navigation and meteorology. we studied meteorology.
Right.
So that was my training,
Right.
and for the Air Corps.
Right. Well, as you saw things, the storm clouds building up, and of course, by 1940, the war clouds had really covered part of Europe. Hitler was on the move.
Yeah.
What did you foresee? Did you?
When I graduated from University of Miami in meteorology and this navigation I was telling you about, that was in January of '41. They sent me up to Washington State, McCord Field, Washington.
Okay.
17th Bomb Group up there. And all during 1941, we were replacing our old B-18s and B-23s with this new B-25 Mitchell bomber, which was going to be the bomber that Jimmy Doolittle used on our raid on Tokyo in the spring of 1942.
Right.
4 months after Pearl Harbor.
Now, you told me earlier that when you were in the Northwest, you spent some time in Pendleton, Oregon.
Yes, we did. We had a base back there. As a matter of fact, we moved our group back there sometime in the summer of 1941. Most of our group flew in and out of there.
Right.
Then, as soon as the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, we moved up. Part of our group flew out of Tacoma, and the rest of us flew out of just south of there, out of Portland, Oregon. And we flew out off the coast of Oregon and Washington, searching for Japanese. We fully expected after they hit Pearl Harbor, they would come on, but they never did. We learned later. Other air groups were flying out off of the California coast, but we had the responsibility of Oregon and Washington.
Well, that's very interesting because, as I told you, I come from Oregon originally, and I can remember Pendleton, Oregon in the 1930s and 40s as just a dusty little town way out in nowhere, up there in eastern Oregon.
You're talking about Portland?
Yeah, no, Pendleton.
Oh, Pendleton. Oh, yeah, that was just a little town.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, they didn't have room for all of us on the field, so we lived a lot of us lived in homes where they rented out rooms in town.
How about that? Yeah. Well, that was a real cowboy town in those days. They had a big roundup there every year. Pendleton Roundup.
That's right.
Well, let's move on now. Okay, so now you're out there and you're patrolling the Northwest coast. When did you first hear or get an inkling about what was being planned for what turned out to be 30 seconds over Tokyo?
Well, about the third week of January, 42 that would be, our group suddenly had orders to fly to South Carolina, to Columbia, South Carolina. And when we got there, we were told that a very secret mission was being planned that had unusual elements of danger in it, and they wanted to tell us that ahead of time and ask for people to volunteer. And our whole group volunteered. After all, we were in the Air Force, we were at war, and we all figured we were going to have dangerous missions. So everybody stepped forward. And they sent 20 crews of us down to Eglin Field, Florida. And when we got down there, Jimmy Doolittle put in his first appearance. A very dynamic leader. And of course, we knew of him and his flying exploits, of what he had done through the 20s and 30s.
He was a national hero in peacetime, wasn't he?
He and I guess you'd say Lindbergh and who was that
Rickenbacker?
They were probably the three most famous aviators of the first half of the 20th century.
Absolutely.
So we knew all about him.
Sure.
And we found out he was a dynamic leader. So we started training there. One thing he emphasized, this had to be secret. He didn't tell us where we were going. He said, but If the enemy finds out what we're up to, we'll never get there.
Right.
It has to be. And you to write your families, tell them you're going to leave the country for a couple of months and you'll contact them as soon as you get back.
Boy, oh
That's
boy.
how secret it was going to be.
Yes, I should say.
So we trained there. I had a very good assignment from the boss. About the first week of February, he sent me and another fellow named Davy Jones up to Washington, D.C. And we worked with Air Force intelligence for about 10 days. What we were told to do was to get maps for 20 crews of the Japanese islands and of China, and target information, the exact location of military and industrial targets in the Japanese islands. That was our assignment. And we went up to Air Force intelligence, excuse me. 2 men were assigned to work with us, and they were told to just get what we wanted and don't ask any questions. They set aside a room, changed the lock on it, and every day we got more things in there. And being the lowest ranking officer of the group, I had to clean the place up and shred the papers every night.
Well, you were accustomed to that, weren't you?
Yeah, I was accustomed to that. So we got all of those things together and created them up. And the last day, the boss showed up in Washington, D.C., and we flew back to Eglin Field with all of this information created up in an aircraft.
Well, that must have stirred up a lot of questions in all of your minds. What's this all about?
Oh, in our mind. Well, we knew what we were going to do. The 2 of us knew just what we were going to do. But we were told not to talk. And apparently we didn't. Because I've had some of those fellows that flew with us that said they didn't know where we were going when we went out of San Francisco Bay on that carrier.
Oh my
I can
God.
hardly believe that. But I've
imagine.
had them tell me that they thought we were going to Hawaii with a load of planes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
But I thought everybody knew by that time, but apparently not.
Isn't that something? Well, that's so here you had all this information and the charts and geography tips and so forth to go on. And what was your next move then? Oh, I know what I wanted to ask you. Was your father still alive at this time?
Yes, my father died after the war.
Oh, he did?
Yes.
Okay. So he knew about your service?
Yes, he did.
Isn't
Yeah,
that? Oh,
he
that's
did.
something.
Yes.
Okay, well then moving on, tell us about that that great time down in San Francisco and your orders.
Yeah. Well, the 3rd week, excuse me, the 3rd week of March, we flew out to Sacramento. Now that was an Air Force supply base and rehabilitation and all that sort of things. And we landed there with our 20 planes, and they put all new props on our planes and leaned down our carburetors, did all that sort of thing. And then on the first day of April, we flew over, just a short hop over to San Francisco Bay, and our newest carrier, the Hornet, had just gotten there a day or 2 before, and it was in a slip next to a landing strip, and we landed there. And the boss landed the first plane, and when he got out of his plane, they said, "We can only accommodate 16 of your planes. We can't handle 20 on the deck." They just decided that. So the boss stood there, and as each pilot taxied up, he would shout up to the pilot, "How's your plane? Everything okay?" And the pilot, not knowing how important this question was, if he gave him anything other than this, you know, "Everything's okay. My left engine is rough or something. Taxi over here." He eliminated 4 planes. But the 4 crews went with us for security reasons originally.
Yes.
But on the 18-day trip across the Pacific, it was possible to dip into those places and make some good personnel changes, personnel changes into other crews.
Right.
So they were a good labor pool that the boss used.
Gosh.
So
Boy, that was just the thinking that man had, and the clarity of his choices.
He was sharp. That night, now we thought that under cover of darkness, see the West Coast was all blacked out, we'd get out of there under cover of darkness. But about 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they said Army air flying crews can go into San Francisco and have the night on the town. And I'm not going to go into too many details about that night on the town, but it was quite a night. But what we didn't know was that Bull Halsey flew in from Hawaii that night and met with the boss in a hotel room in downtown San Francisco. Halsey was going to be in command of the task force. There was going to be another carrier, the Enterprise, and he and the boss talked it over. And Halsey said, if I can get the task force within 400 miles of Japan, that will be my goal if I can do that. So that's the way that stood. And I won't go into any details about what all of us did. But it was a memorable night.
I'll bet it was.
And we were told to meet a boat down at a certain pier at 7:30 in the morning. And the amazing thing was we all showed up. Everybody was there.
Everybody was sharp. Well, that's interesting, and I think I've told you this before, but you know, the Navy always refers to this event as the Halsey Doolittle Raid.
Which they should. Which they should, absolutely.
Well, we'll talk about some of that further on here, because I know how you admired Captain Mark Mitcher, who was the skipper of the Hornet. Okay, so now, how did they get the planes onto the flat top?
Big crane picked them up.
Big crane.
Huge crane picked them up and set them down on the deck.
Now, the placement of those planes on deck was crucial, wasn't it?
Well, I suppose it was, yes. They had to have a certain
Because of
number.
room and everything,
Yeah.
constriction.
1 through 16.
Yeah.
And when we sailed out of San Francisco Bay, they took up the whole deck. Then after we were at sea, a few days, they were all moved back so that they took up less than half of the deck so that we had our takeoff space. We had 400 feet clear for takeoff, and all of us were behind there.
Wow.
And we all, they had a line 400 feet, and at the big takeoff time off of Japan, each plane was pulled up to that same line and took off. We were all given 400 feet.
Everybody had the same. Oh, isn't there something about one plane at the after end of the flight deck that the tail actually hung over the end of the flight deck?
That's right.
It was that close.
Yeah, the two planes at the last, all of them had their tails out over that in order to get room.
What was the distance between wingtips and the island of the plane?
6 feet.
Wow.
By the time we lined up 400 feet from the bow, and that's why, see, I was in plane number 9.
Right.
And by the time 8 planes had taken off, we could have had another couple hundred feet. But everybody took off from that same line. And the main reason for that was we just had this 6 feet from our right wingtip to the island.
Wow.
And that gave us 6 feet from our left wheel to the edge of the flight deck.
Wow.
So if you had a longer run, you were more apt to go 6 feet. See, this happened to be a morning where there were heavy seas, and the flight deck was giving it this, just bobbing and weaving. So each plane was pulled up to that same line, and the flagman timed it so that the plane would reach the end of the deck just at its highest point, just before it started down. That was theoretically how it worked and how it did work from 400 feet.
How about that?
Each plane was pulled up to that same line because the chance of going right or left too far was too great.
Right.
So we all had 400 feet.
Well, the technicalities of that is just amazing. And so many people, of course, and thanks to your relating it here, gives people an idea of the crucial aspect because of that carrier. And you know, that carrier today, would compared to the big carriers we have at sea now, which cover 4.5 acres.
I know.
Those big
We
ones.
thought this was a big ship, but it's
And
nothing.
the Hornet was a big one, you bet.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now how about life aboard a carrier for an Army Air Corps
life
guy?
was very nice. It took me about 2 or 3 days to learn how to get from my cabin up to the flight deck. Some sailor would come and show me how to, these myriad tunnels and ladders and things like that.
Right.
They put me down they assigned us all different places on the deck, and they assigned me to a room where 2 ensigns had a double-decker, and they had put a cot in there for me, and you had to go out of the room to change your mind. It was so small. and they, when I first went in there that first day, both of those ensigns were in the room, and we introduced ourselves, and they gleefully told me that they called their room Torpedo Junction because we were right on the water line. They wanted me to feel at home. So many nights I went to bed wondering how it would feel if a torpedo came into that cot with me. But they wanted to make sure I knew we were right on the water line.
That's right. Well, the Navy was welcoming to you.
Oh,
and,
sure.
Warm and.
You know those 2 sailors? I never got to talk to them again. By the time I would, excuse me, get down to bed about 10:30 or 11 at night, one would be sleeping, the other would be off on his job.
Sure.
I never even got into a conversation again. There was always one sleeping, one gone. Never talked to him again. Isn't that something?
Yeah, in the Navy we call that a hot bunk.
Well, I suppose so.
It never cooled off.
No, they had a double-decker.
Yeah.
That's
right.
They were apparently on 4 hours, off 4 hours.
Right.
Something like that.
Exactly. Well, life aboard a carrier was sort of new to you, and of course the Navy was very infamous for its card games and dice games.
Well, there was an area in the ship called the Admiral's Quarters, which accommodated an admiral when he was aboard, but we didn't have an admiral.
Right.
So we had something like a dozen men. There was a bedroom and I guess it would have been a meeting room for the admiral had he been on, with a big round table. And we had about a dozen of our men assigned in cots all over the admiral's country. And that big round table was a wonderful place for poker games.
Oh, yeah.
There was a 24-hour poker game going there.
Absolutely.
Most of the Doolittle, we'd been paid a few days before we got on. And almost all of us took off 18 days later flat broke. The Navy boys cleaned us out. They wanted to be sure to do that before we left.
Right.
But we had a great time on that, and they fed us breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Wonderful food.
Great.
And then at 10:30, 11 o'clock, we'd go down and get whatever we wanted to eat.
Sure.
And for this, they charged the officers $1 a day for food.
$1 a day.
This Navy officer came to us, the commissioned officers in the Doolittle group, and asked for $1 a day, $18 for the 18 days we were going to be on this ship. So I have a check. Apparently I didn't have that much cash, because I have a check for $7 that I paid him, and I guess I had $11 cash I could pay him. I still have that canceled check.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll bet you have a ton of memorabilia.
I do that.
That you've saved all these years.
I think you've seen my apartment.
Right.
It looks like a junk heap now.
Yeah, I'll say. Well, now, you didn't go into Pearl Harbor, did you? On the way across, you bypassed Hawaii.
This was not to
So
be
secret.
Nobody. No, we weren't to be seen. See, we were
Right.
sneaking up on this.
Right.
After we were at sea for about a week, we rendezvoused with Halsey, and he had the Enterprise, the other carrier, and 2 more cruisers and 4 destroyers.
Right.
Of course, there were 2 tankers too.
Yeah.
And we headed across the Pacific. our planes took up the flight deck of the Hornet, and their planes were down on the hangar deck. So only the planes from the Enterprise could fly cover overhead and reconnoiter up ahead.
Right.
And there were actual days in the middle of the Pacific when they figured we couldn't reach Tokyo, when we were told in our morning briefing that if the task force was intercepted that day, our planes were going to be thrown overboard because they wanted to get the Navy planes up to help protect the task force.
Sure.
That provision lasted for 2 days, and then we had a meeting where they said, if we're intercepted today, you fellas will take off. You can reach Japan. Good luck.
Yeah. That's a interesting question that brings up, because we know that you had to take off early because of surveillance, but was there an absolute limit that you could have taken off and still reached Japan?
Yes, that was after these 2 days of warnings like this, where our planes were going to be thrown overboard.
Yeah.
Then we were told, you can reach Japan.
From here.
Bon voyage.
What was that, about 800 miles out? Or?
Oh, it was more than that.
More than
probably.
that.
I'm not sure, probably.
Wow.
Well over that, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, continue on here with this this great story you're telling us. You were spotted by a couple of Japanese ships that were...
On the morning of the 18th day, now we had dropped off, a day or two before that, we dropped off our 8 destroyers because they couldn't keep up with us, refueled the cruisers, and we were going in at flank speed, whatever that is. I talk Navy and I don't know
30
what I'm
knots,
talking about.
32 knots.
And we were heading in, and the morning of the 18th day, we were going to take off late in the afternoon or early evening. We went between 2 Japanese picket ships. Our intelligence didn't know that they had picket ships out that far out, 800 miles.
Wow.
700 miles.
Yeah.
And we went, and our radio people on the Hornet picked up the fact that before they were sunk, they were able to contact the main islands and say that this task force was coming. The Japanese knew we were coming. Right. Of course, they were both sunk right away. When I got up on deck, I was down in the eating breakfast. I got up on deck, the planes from the Enterprise were going overhead, and a cruiser had dropped back and was firing. They said it fired 900 rounds at the ship before it finally sunk it.
Wow.
And the dive bombers were dived by. It was overkill. Down it went. They sunk 2 of those. And then, of course, Halsey called over and said the Army boys would take off immediately. Now, we were out further than we hoped to be.
Right. So that was fairly early in the morning, huh?
Yeah. That was, well, all of this encounter took place. It was just barely getting light then. And we started taking off at 8:15 in the morning. Doolittle took the first plane off at about 8:15. And it took about 4 to 5 minutes. You say 5 minutes between planes by the time the sailors had dragged each plane up to that line, and the conditions were just right for takeoff. The flagman put his flag down. Yeah. About 5 minutes apart, which meant that, of course, we couldn't form in formation. That took gas. So we were that much apart, and that result of that is most of us never saw another one of our planes. We never saw another one of the B-25.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
By the time we got to the northeastern section of Tokyo, we could see where 8 planes had hit targets. Now this was about noontime.
Right.
And we could see where 8 planes had hit targets. There was fire and flame and all this ahead of us. Mm-hmm. And we flew in right at rooftop level to make it more difficult for their anti-aircraft. They had anti-aircraft towers, and they actually had to deflect their guns so that shooting at our planes, they had their shells, some of them exploding in the streets of Tokyo, trying to shoot our boys down.
Oh, about that.
And by the time we got there, there were a lot of Jap planes, pursuits in the air.
Right.
But we stayed at rooftop level, clear across the city of Tokyo, And it happened, our course took us right over Hirohito's house at about 50 feet. But we had strict orders not to bomb it. We were not to touch Hirohito's house. But we flew right over and down to the northern part of Tokyo Bay and flew up to our bombing elevation.
Mm-hmm. What elevation was that?
1,100 feet.
1,100 feet.
Yeah. And we went in there, dropped our bombs, and then dropped back down to rooftop level and flew. We flew out to sea as though we were going back to confuse their defenses, and it apparently worked. We flew out to sea about 50 miles, right down on the deck, so the radar couldn't pick us up.
Right.
And then we turned right, and we paralleled the Japanese islands all the rest of that day until late in the afternoon.
We're down to the southern
Till
part
the
of
southern
islands.
tip.
Wow.
And the Japanese were getting together. They knew that the task force was coming.
Right.
And they knew it would take that task force a day to get close enough for Navy planes. They knew the range of Navy planes to attack Japan. So they figured they had 24 hours to get together a Navy task force and an air task force to hit our task force.
Sure.
In the meantime, we were on our way out of there, and our task force had turned around and headed back.
Right. Did you have any indication of what had happened to the first planes ahead of you when they went in? Did you know if any of your planes had been shot down by the time you got there?
We didn't know, and,
Didn't know
and none
that.
of them were shot down.
No way.
None of them were shot down.
None was shot
We
down.
all got away from there.
Yeah.
Went out 50 miles and then paralleled the Japanese. One time during that day, the Japanese were gathering a fleet, a Navy fleet, an air armada to hit our task force the next morning. They
Oh,
figured
they were?
Oh yeah, they were getting that
Because
together.
they had the information.
Oh sure, the ships that we sunk
Yeah.
had radioed in. Our people heard them radio in, so they
Gotcha.
knew.
Gotcha.
And as we went south, late sometime in that afternoon, they were gathering this fleet together. We got too close to a Japanese cruiser in our plane. We were right down on the deck, and it started shooting at us. And we went through columns of water that it threw up for what seemed like an eternity. I didn't think we'd ever get out of there.
Good heavens.
Yeah, and we did. It did just water. We got all wet.
Water spouts.
Yeah.
Just
We kept flying through those.
Yeah.
I thought we'd never get out of range of that ship,
Isn't that
but we
something?
did. They didn't shoot anybody down.
Oh,
One plane opted to go, after they bombed a target in Tokyo, they went across Japan. They figured they didn't have enough gas, and they turned right and they went up to Vladivostok. And they landed there, and they had over a year in Russia, that crew.
Wow.
And the rest of us, 15 of us, went as planned, down to the southern tip of the Japanese islands, and then we had about a 5-hour flight, at least 5 hours, across the China Sea to China. Now, originally, when we got there and headed due west, we figured we would run out of gas 100 to 150 miles short of the China coast. Then we got this tremendous break. There was a huge storm. We could see it building up. This was late afternoon or early evening now. You see, we were in the air from the time our plane took off of the deck of that carrier till we ran out of gas over China. We were in the air 15 and a half hours.
Wow.
We nurtured that gas for
Yeah.
15 and a half hours.
Yeah.
But we could see this big storm. So we pulled up to about 1,500 feet and we took what we call a wind drift. And that's when we got the good news. Instead of the anticipated westerly headwind, all those hours across the China Sea, we had a tailwind. We had a wind out of the east, a tailwind, and we had, the only way we could anticipate or try to figure the velocity was the action of that wind on the surface waters. And if it's blowing the white caps off, as you could tell, it's a pretty strong wind.
Right.
And we could tell. That's the only way then we could know. But we had a strong tailwind, and that made all the difference. All of our crews pulled up into this big storm. It was getting dark now. And flew into it till we ran out of gas. 4 of them stayed down on the surface in contact with the water and landed along the coast. That's what Ted Lawson did, the fellow that wrote the book 30 Seconds Over Tokyo. They ditched, and of course, the story of all their problems is told in that book.
Right.
3 others ditched along there. One of them that ditched, 2 men drowned trying to swim ashore, and the Japanese captured the 3 what were left in that crew, and they captured 1 other full crew of 5 men. There's 8 men they had, and ultimately they put 3 of those men to death, and put the other 5 in prison for a sentence of lifetime in prison. And 1 of them died, but when the war ended, 4 of them were still alive and came home.
That's amazing.
Yeah. The rest of us went into China. Most of our people bailed out along that first province, which was the province immediately south of Shanghai, which was occupied by the Japanese. And the friendly Chinese, when they found out who our people were and what they had done, got most of our people out of that province, out of Japanese-held territory.
Well, you know, that brings up an interesting point, Tom, that this whole thing, the idea of it was that our country had a very low morale at that point because we'd lost so much to the Japanese as they'd marched through Southeast Asia and into the Dutch Indies. Did this information and the Chinese getting you, that must have been sort of a shot in the arm to the Chinese, the friendly Chinese too, to know that they had an ally that could do this.
Definitely, but that people in that province paid a terrible price.
Oh yeah.
Because within the next month, the Japanese drove down in there, and they put to death any Chinese that had helped the Doolittle Raiders escape.
Isn't that?
And they killed thousands of people there.
Just imagine.
So they paid a terrible price.
Yeah, all civilians.
All civilians.
Oh
yeah.
my goodness. And one other question I wanted to ask and get this across. You talk about the plane that was interned by the Soviets at Vladivostok. How long were they interned by the Soviets?
They were held in a house arrest for over 14 months. See, the Russians were at war. They had their hands full on the Western Front with the Nazis. They didn't want to have trouble with the Japanese at that time.
Same time.
And so they just put this crew under house arrest, moved them from city to city over a period of 14 months. And at the end of 14 months, they were in a place down there, what is now Iran. It was Persia then.
Right.
And they actually had asked their Russian captors to let them work. And they were actually working in a factory, these 5 crewmen, just to have something to do.
Right.
And they also made some friends who spirited them over the border into what was then Persia, Iran.
How about that?
Iran now,
Yeah.
to freedom.
How about
And
that?
a funny story about that whole thing was that every month, Secretary of Treasury of our country got a bill for food, board and room for that crew from the Russian government. And he had Morgenthau was his name, and he had a running gag with General Doolittle now, and he would contact him and say, I have another monthly bill for your crew in friendly Russia. Should I pay it? And Doolittle, of course, would say, go ahead and pay it again. Sure.
That is fun. And you know, through all the trials and tribulations, there, even in the most desperate times, there was always a little touch of humor.
Yeah.
Yankee humor, and that type of thing that carried you guys through
That's what gets
the
you through.
worst times.
That's right. That's what gets you through.
Yeah, your friendship, of course. Now, a lot of people don't know, but there were 5 men to a crew of the plane. So you had 16 planes, that's 80 men total. Now that is a very small group of men in a very, very exclusive fraternity.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And now you have memorial cups or goblets.
Oh, yeah.
Tell them about that.
Well over a half a century ago, some city, I think it was Tucson, presented our group. We've had a reunion in some city ever since World War II.
Right,
our
every
group.
year.
And they presented us with 80 cups for the 16 crews, with our names engraved on these silver cups. And as the men died, those cups were turned over. And at each one of our reunions, we have a toast where we toast the ones that have departed the previous year and turn their cups over. And that group of cups is now at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. It was at the Air Force Academy in Colorado for many, many years, and they carried on the tradition. A couple of cadets and an officer would bring that case to our reunions.
Right.
A nice tradition. Now, the Air Force up in Dayton, Ohio, the museum, discovered that they were just as entitled to those cups as the Academy, so they got the cups away from them. They're up there now, and they're carrying on the same thing.
Yeah, they brought those in last year, didn't they?
They did, just last year, yeah.
At the 64th reunion.
Yeah, they're up there.
Yeah. Well, now, briefly, give us a little feel of what it was like to be in China. You parachuted out of your plane.
Mm-hmm.
Your captain had given the orders to bail out because you knew you were going in. Is that right?
Yeah, we all bailed out, and it was in a storm. And 60, let me see, the men from 11 planes bailed out. That's 55 men bailed out of 11 planes. 4 planes ditched along the coast, and 1 went to Russia.
Right.
So the 55 men that bailed out in this storm had the same experience I did, of course. We pulled up to 10,000 feet because we knew there were mountains there. And we had to clear that, went up to 8,000. So, and we couldn't see our wingtips. It was a tremendous storm. So when we ran out of gas, we knew for over an hour there's nothing we could do but bail out. You couldn't let down.
Right.
So we were just all ready. And when the time came, the engines quit, out we went. And everybody that bailed out had the same experience I did. And it was a very peculiar experience. I waited a bit. You don't want to pull your ripcord too soon. You're supposed to count to something, but I forgot to count. But I waited a while, and I had the most peculiar sensation. I could just barely see my chute, and I felt like I was standing still, that the only thing moving was my chute. And it would go way over to one side, and it would collapse, and I'd lose all my air. And I'd think, boy, I've had it. Then it would fill up, go over the other side. And the only thing that seemed to be moving was my chute. Actually, I was in a huge pendulum.
Yeah.
And when I'd get way up here, all the air would be out of my chute.
Okay.
When I pulled back down, it would fill up again.
Sure.
And that kept up for some time while I was up in the higher regions. And then as we got lower to the ground, it settled over my head. And I couldn't see a thing. And the first indication I was near the ground, a branch of a tree hit my face. And I was so lucky. My shroud lines just let me touch the ground. And there I was. And I tried to pull my chute out of the tree, and it was all tangled up.
Yeah.
So I just unbuckled the belt and walked away.
Oh.
That was my experience in bailing out at
Oh
night.
boy, you were so lucky.
We had some fellows that were injured. They broke bones. They broke non-death threatening injuries, broken bones.
Right.
We had about 6 of those fellows
Right.
hanging over cliffs and things like that.
But you weren't
But
injured
only one
at all.
died.
You weren't injured at all.
I wasn't injured at all. I was in perfect shape.
Boy, I'll tell you, the good Lord and
Yeah.
Mother Nature were
I
sure
was
watching
lucky.
over you.
And the next day, when it turned light, I found I was at the top of what looked like an endless row of rice paddies going down out of sight.
Yeah.
And I started down those, and after an hour or two, I picked up the first member of my crew, and then an hour later the other. So there were 3 of us together. And we wandered down through these rice paddies all day until late in the afternoon. And the Chinese that would see us would dart off into the distances. We were weird-looking characters with pistols, you know, and all wet.
Gosh, yes.
Late in the afternoon, we went up to a Chinese farmhouse and indicated to him that we were soaking wet. It rained all day. We wanted to, and he took us back into a room, a mud floor, but he had a big round table stove or furnace. And we were standing around that, wringing our clothes out. Now, we had put our 45s over on a table, and fortunately, that guy grabbed those guns and ran out of the room. And we looked up, and there were rifles in every window pointing at us. And there was what obviously was an officer at the door. He had a pistol, and he had a scroll with what turned out to be Chinese figures. We didn't know whether these people were Chinese or Japanese. We simply didn't know.
Yeah.
They were little guys with green uniforms.
Sure.
And this stuff, we couldn't read this stuff. And I went up to them. They had told us a phrase, Lu Shu Megua Fuji. I am an American. It didn't mean a thing to this guy. He just stuck the pistol closer to my nose. And so we were prisoners. They took us prisoner. They didn't know who we were.
No.
And we didn't know whether they were Japanese or Chinese.
Yeah.
But they marched us off. And we were dead tires anyway for a couple hours. We got to a 2-story barracks building they had, sort of out in the country. And they put us upstairs on tables. We slept on tables upstairs. And they fed us, they gave us some rice. But they didn't know who we were.
No.
And the next day, they started marching down the trail, and here was a village, a mountain village, a walled village. And the big gate was open, and the head mandarin and a whole bunch of people were coming out. And mingled in with these first people coming out were 2 or 3 Caucasian men in black robes. And they turned out to be men from a theatrical church headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. And they had a hospital and a school up in this mountain village.
Missionaries.
Missionaries. And of course, when we got down there, here we told them who we were, and they told the Chinese who we were, and everything was fine.
Fine.
That's how we were.
Well, didn't you have on an American flag on your jacket or anything?
Those were later fellas.
That was later.
Yeah.
That was later.
All we were told were to tell these Chinese, Lu Shu Megua Fuji, then they would know. And we found out later that back then, before radio and television had gotten into the country, there were dialects a Chinese person going 50 or 100 miles from his home might not be understood.
Sure.
There are dialogues all over the country. Now it's more or less universal. The Han version of the language, I understand, is what is universal now.
Right.
And they have television and radio and all that. But this was before that was very, very prevalent.
Well, we've got to be concerned about time here. We're okay. We're okay, and we'll work it out fine. With your, how long was it before you were finally back in contact with the United States?
Well, we were back there. The Chinese brought our pilot in, Doc Watson, had broken his shoulder. He was a big man, about 240 pounds. And somehow or other, the shroud lines of his chute had tangled up. And so as he experiences, he felt this terrible pain. He found his arms just sort of following him down. Well, it had broken his shoulder.
Oh, God.
And he was in terrible pain.
Yeah.
And the Chinese got him to us a few days later. And the 5th man of our crew fell into the hands of what you could only call Chinese bandits. And I understand that through the mountainous areas there, men who had gotten away from Chiang Kai-shek's army, deserters, formed bands and went through the country and lived as best they could off the country.
Right.
And they captured this fifth man of our crew. And after about 2 or 3 days, they're going to try to get a ransom. They figured there was some money in this fellow.
Right.
And they left him with one man, and the other 4 of them wandered off someplace. And he clobbered this guy and got away. And friendly Chinese found him and brought him into us. That's how we finally got together.
How about that?
And over a period of days and weeks, the Chinese gathered us back first into a city in the middle of China called Lingling. And the Japanese knew where we were all the time, and they bombed the airport there every day, putting big craters in. And this one day, DC-3 came in, and we all hopped on it, and he took us to Chongqing.
Oh, boy.
And that was the headquarters of
That was a
Chiang Kai-shek.
provisional government,
Yeah.
wasn't it?
Yeah. And we were there for several days. And several of us got the privilege of having lunch with Chiang Kai-shek and his wife. Chiang Kai-shek, am I right on names? I get confused.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his wife.
Right.
She spoke English, of course, much better than we did. She went to finishing schools in the East here.
Wellesley College.
She loved this country.
Yeah.
And so...
She was one of the Sung sisters.
Yes, that's right. One of
Famous
the
family.
3 famous Sung sisters,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And there were about a half a dozen of us there at headquarters one day, and she had us to her home, and we got to have lunch with her. And we retired, and the Generalissimo came in. He didn't talk English, so he gave a little talk to us with an interpreter. And we retired to the living room, and he presented us with hung Chinese gongs on us for what we had done.
Oh, yeah.
So it was quite a day. I remember that day.
Say.
And when we were leaving, I never do pick up autographs, but she stood at the door and she said, "Now, if any of you want my autograph, I'll be happy to give it to you." And so I had to forage around. I found a little red address book I had, and she signed her name in Chinese, and Madam Sung.
How about that?
Madam Chiang Kai-shek.
How about that?
And I still have that.
You have that, I should say.
Yeah.
Well, what a wonderful experience. Well, then you were flown back to the States.
Well, first
Back to
we
Pearl
left
Harbor,
about 5 of our crews with the newly formed 14th Air Force in China. We never flew together. Doolittle Raiders never flew together as a group. The rest of us went down. We landed at Kunming, where the Flying Tigers were, and met a bunch of them. And they told us to resign and join them because there were these $500 bills flying around. They're easy to pick up. So then we flew over to Calcutta, and we left about 6 crews with the 10th Air Force in India. And the rest of us got orders to fly home. Actually, we went completely around the world. We bombed Tokyo on the way, went through China, India, Africa, to South America, and up to Washington.
Wow.
So all the way around for one mission.
How about that? Yeah. Well, then your prospects from there on, once you got back to the States, you had a furlough.
2 weeks. Got 2 weeks off.
You only got 2 weeks?
2 weeks. Well, they did it. They had me going around to different factories from Wisconsin to New York, talking to the workers, telling them what a wonderful job they were doing and buy more war bonds.
War
that was
bond
my
drive.
mission. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So I did that for 2 or 3 weeks.
Right.
And then they sent me down to a B-26 Marauder group training down in Louisiana. I forget the names of fields. Anyway, 5 of us were assigned to this group. In the 1st of October, we took off. We had gone up to Fort Wayne, Indiana, and as they got our planes all in order, we took off usually in groups of 5 or 6, flew up to Goose Bay, Labrador, over to Iceland, and to Iceland, and what's the other big one over there? Greenland. Greenland first, and then Iceland, and then down to England. And that I had just gotten to Iceland.
Yeah, so Iceland,
Yeah.
You were only there for what, a day? You were just
no.
kind of in and out?
No, see, we were weathered in for at least a week in all these
you were.
stops. And they never sent a twin-engine group over the northern route that late in the season again, because we lost 6 planes and 6 crews, just gone, trying to get through.
Never
We were weathered in about 2 or 3 days in Labrador, about a week or 10 days in Greenland,
Right.
and then Iceland, we were there for a week or so. I bought a pair of ice skates from the Canadian PX and ice skated in Iceland for several days. Then we flew down to Prestwick, Scotland, and landed there, and ended up in Norwich over on the other side of England, probably in sometime in October.
Mm-hmm.
And
Now this was 42. This was 1942.
yeah, this was the fall of '42.
Boy.
And the invasion of North Africa was in the first about the 10th of November.
Right.
So as soon as they secured a field at Oran, they ordered us to go down. So we were the first groups that went down to Oran and landed
So you
there.
flew from Norwich to,
Well, we actually flew to Land's End and stayed overnight there. I think one reason was to get you out over the ocean, because the Luftwaffe controlled that bay, what's that big bay right there? They had control of it.
okay.
You know, where the invasion took place. That whole area was covered by the Luftwaffe.
Right.
So we flew out around. Right. We didn't even have our machine guns mounted or ready to. We couldn't have defended ourselves any way but flying faster.
Just get out of the,
get out of
the way.
And Doolittle and Eisenhower actually went down in 2 planes, and they had a chance of being shot down.
Right.
But they got out of it.
My gosh.
Yeah. Now, they were in the big plane,
B-17?
17s, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm telling
Well, then you got to you flew into Oran, did you?
Yeah, yeah. And then that was in when was that? That was in November.
November?
Yeah.
Later in November.
And then we moved up to Algiers.
Okay.
Maison Blanc was the airfield there.
Okay.
Then we moved up to a field called Talergma.
Huh.
And we were flying now against Rommel and the German boys. And some of it was pretty tough going. We got a lot of our people shot down because the Luftwaffe outnumbered us.
Yes.
And we had to get in there and hit our targets and get out.
That desert warfare was terrible too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was very desperate.
And we bombed targets in Tunisia, Sfax, Gabes, and the city of Tunis.
Oh, yes.
And down to Libya. Rommel's stuff down there. And,
How about Bizerti? Bizerti?
Oh, Bizerta, sure. Yeah, Bizerta, yeah. I was shot down about 30 miles north of Bizerta on one of our skip. They had us skip bombing. In January of '42, we trained and found out how to skip bomb down at Biskra in the southern part of Tunisia, or maybe it's still Libya. They had a big target in a smooth, sandy area, and we learned that by going in at about 170 miles an hour, skip your bombs up into this target. They had a great big ship-sized target there, and we learned how to skip bomb. Then we started doing that work.
Did they think that was more efficient than direct bombing?
Yeah.
Ah.
And we went out all from Bizerta, all around Sardinia, Sicily, looking for German supply ships, bringing supplies down to Rommel.
Across the Mediterranean.
And I was on 3 of those. And
Wow.
the third one, we got all shot up. They hit us as we went in. As we went in, my job was to go down in the nose with the .50 caliber machine gun and sweep the deck of the freighter that we were making the run on. And they were shooting back at me.
You were firing the machine gun?
Yeah. And tracer bullets, I had, every third bullet was a tracer, and they had tracers coming right back at us.
Now, you were a navigator on this plane as well?
Yeah, yeah.
My
But
gosh.
on the run, on the target, that was my job.
Yeah.
And the bombardier was the co-pilot. He had a thing here to flip this thing off when they reached a certain point.
I see.
I don't know where the bombardier was. He's gone someplace. So this third mission of that kind I went on, we got all shot up. We got, they knocked out our one engine. We couldn't shut our bomb bay door. All the hydraulic fluid was gone. And we were on one engine, and that pilot pulled that thing over the ship and down, and we stayed in the air. I thought we were going in. And we stayed in the air, and we flew down to Bizerta on one engine now, turned right, and I told the guy if we could stay in the air for about 120 miles, right near a town named Bone, B-O-N-E,
yeah.
There was a nice, smooth, sandy beach. Up until that point, the mountains, the Atlas Mountains, came right down to the sea. There's no place to land any place.
Wow.
So as we flew west, our one good engine finally quit. After about a half an hour, and we went in, and those B-26s were real heavy, they had big engines, and went right down, and we all got out. I didn't tie myself in with the belt because I was afraid I might not be able to get it. And the water, the last thing I remembered was a wall of water coming at me, and it drove me back against the bulkhead. That's what it had to do, because I was knocked out. But we had opened the hatch above in that compartment, so that when it filled with water, I floated up through that. And I came to it, I looked around, 4 other heads, we were all out. And I had a big bump in the back of my head.
Oh my goodness.
It knocked me out.
Oh.
So the co-pilot was pretty badly wounded, but a pillow came up, one that was on their seats there some way. And we laid him over that pillow, and the top turret gunner and we each could hold onto the strap and backstroke him in. We got him in that way. And the pilot was wounded. He had blood all over his face.
How far offshore were you?
It took us an hour and a half.
Wow.
It took us 1 hour and a half to get to shore.
Good heavens.
And by the time, and it was all rocks down to the shore, but a bunch of Arab men had been watching us.
Right.
And as we got there, we were so pooped we couldn't get up on and they pulled us all out of there.
Oh my goodness sakes.
So that's how we got out of that.
Isn't that something? Good heavens. You.
So what we did, they took us up several hundred feet. There was an old stone hut on a level place, probably a fisherman's hut or something. And then they told me, on the other side of the Atlas Mountains, a British army was fighting a German Nazi army. The Nazis were trying to keep this British army out of Bizerta. That was the state right then. These Arabs said that down, a few miles down, on one of the mountainsides, was a bunch of French Marines who were there to watch and in contact with the British Army to make sure they couldn't be outflanked.
Right.
And they wanted me to go there for help. So one of the Arabs and I walked. It was dark now. By this time it was dark. And we walked for about 2-3 hours. And here was the bonfire, tents, these guys on the side of the mountain where they had a level place. And I couldn't speak French. I didn't know any French, so the Arab knew French.
Right.
And they talked, and he told them the situation. And the only thing I said to him was, I wanted some kind of stuff for wounds, medicine
Yeah.
for wounds.
First aid.
Disinfection.
Yeah.
That was my one word of French.
Disinfection.
My one contribution in French. I said, disinfection. Oh, oui, oui, oui. They had this. And so they sent one of their men back with me in the Arab with disinfection for our boys.
So you got.
And the next day, see, they were able to tell the British about this American crew. And the next day, about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, here came these Red Cross, British Red Cross boys. And they had a stretcher for one of our boys who couldn't walk. And the other one, though they had a pony for him. And we went over the mountain passes over to where the British Army was.
How about
And that was the end of that experience.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness sakes.
Two of those fellows were sent home.
Uh-huh.
Holly Grimm, the co-pilot, never flew again. I talked to him on the phone about a week ago.
Really?
He's a retired doctor, and he was a surgeon. And I've always said to him, Holly, how could you be a surgeon when you had a little piece of flak that damaged your sight in one eye? He said, I did it. I was still a surgeon. He's retired now. He lives in New Orleans.
What an amazing, what an amazing bunch of people you all were. I mean, you were all special people. All of you. I can't get over it because
Well,
you were.
we were just some of the boys fighting. There were boys fighting like this all over the world.
Well, I know it, but it was just an amazing, the concentration of personalities and power in this group.
Well, they had a good bunch of boys from North. Well, everywhere. Our boys, our boys did well everywhere.
Absolutely, absolutely. So then you were assigned to flying across the Mediterranean over to Sicily on bomb runs and that sort of thing?
Oh, yeah.
Now, this was in the B-26, right?
This is the B-26. The Germans, of course, had Sicily.
Oh, yeah.
Now we're talking about, when are we talking? The spring of '43.
Okay.
And we were bombing targets in Palermo and in Catania.
Sicily, yeah.
And
Catania, Messina.
yeah, and then we went up to in Sardinia and bombed the northern part where they had some stuff up there. I never went on a bombing mission to Italy. That came after the battle over Sicily.
Okay.
When our forces started going into Africa. I never got in. I was captured on the 4th of July of 1943. I was shot down over not far from Catania in western Sicily.
Western Sicily.
Yeah.
That was rugged country too, wasn't it? Sicily was very mountainous.
Yeah, there's a lot of mountains.
Yeah.
Where I came down, it was level prairie country. We were bombing this big airfield when we were hit. We were the lead ship of about 40 B-26s. The colonel, our group commander, was in the plane too.
Oh, yes.
And we were the lead ship, and they hit us big time. We had what kind of pursuits? P-38s. We picked up from Tunisia, and we flew between Malta and Sicily and picked up a bunch of RAF Spitfires out of Malta. That's what we had. And as we went into Sicily, we were met with a German Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. And there was a big air battle with this stuff. And then as we got near our target, their flak started and they were shooting. And we were hit big time. And it was one of those hits where you don't say, well, can we still fly it? We had flame all the way from our left engine back past the tail when I looked over there, and we were starting down.
My gosh.
And I had gotten in the last few missions, I'd put a backpack parachute in the back of the plane and one up front. From my experiences, I thought, and I forgot about it. My first indication was when everything was on fire, I've had it. And then no, I've got a chute back here. And I crawled over, put my chute on and bailed out.
Oh my goodness. And
we all bailed out and we all lived.
Yeah. Now you weren't injured when you landed?
No, I wasn't injured. Wasn't injured at all.
Boy, I'll tell you, you had...
I had a funny experience going down though. We had briefings after our missions where they said that they thought they saw German pursuits going after our boys in parachute.
Oh, yeah.
And as I went down, an ME-109 started coming right at me, making passes right at me, and then he'd fly up and just miss my chute. And I was sure this guy, his guns were jammed. That's the only thing I could think of. He made about a half a dozen passes like that at me. And when I landed in this wheat field, I looked up and he came over waggling his wings at about 50 feet.
Oh my God.
I thought, what's crazy about this guy?
Yeah.
That afternoon, they took me into a German general's office in Catania. Now, I don't know whether he was in command of all the troops or just the Air Force or what he was, but he spoke English, and I gave him the required name, rank, and serial number. And then I thought, I have nothing I'll find out what he says about the German pursuits
Right.
trying to strafe me. Because we'd had guys say they thought they saw Schutz doing that pursuit. And he heard me out. I spoke in English, he understood English, and I said, this pursuit was trying to shoot me and his guns were jammed. He made a half a dozen passes at me and he couldn't get them unjammed. And the good general listened to me and he said, Herr Hauptmann, he was not trying to shoot you, he was taking your picture.
Oh.
So the only thing I can figure, this guy had an assignment for propaganda purposes.
Right.
Get a picture of an American coming down in a chute for whatever. And he picked on me.
How about, well,
Yeah.
your luck was sure holding out again,
Yeah.
I'll tell you. That is
Yeah.
just amazing.
And
Well, so then how long were you held there by the Germans?
I was a prisoner for 22 months. I was captured on July 4th.
But they moved you right out of Sicily, did they?
Yeah, that night,
to
the
Germany?
rest of they took me from Catania up to Messina, which is the town just before you go across
Right
the
on
toll.
street there, yeah.
And as I got up there, I was alone with some Germans.
Uh-huh.
This bus came and they had the rest of our crew. They had our colonel and the rest of our crew.
Oh my God.
And we stayed there that night in this jail.
Yeah.
And the next day they flew us to Naples. And we were there for maybe a week. And the first interrogation. Then we went to Rome and we stayed in a hotel up about the 7th or 8th floor. They had guards all around us. Then they took us down and put us on a train and took us to Germany.
Oh.
That was the way it worked.
From Rome up to Germany. Now, where was this prisoner of war camp in Germany?
Stalag Luft 3 was the camp. First we went to Frankfurt, which was the big interrogation center in Germany.
Right.
And we were there about a week, and we were all interrogated one way or another.
Right.
They were either going to give you the business and be rough with you or be nice to you. And in my case, they decided they were going to be nice to me. And I went in and hello, Captain, and all this kind of stuff. And I was very suspicious, but he's just as nice as he could be.
Uh-huh.
And all I told him was, this is an awful way to treat people. You put me in a cell down there. This is July. It's hot. It's about 100 degrees, and my room is about 120 degrees because that radiator cannot be turned off.
Oh.
And I couldn't sleep all night. There was no knob to turn it off. And I called the guard, and he couldn't help me. And I said, that I won't tell you the expressions I used with this German officer, but I told him very strongly what I thought about that kind of treatment. And he was so nice. He said, Hauptmann, I will look into that. I will find out what's causing that trouble, and I will get that heat turned off. So
Sure.
that was my experience. They were nice to me.
I'll be darned.
Yeah. And for some reason, there was 4 German officers sitting on a bench listening to the whole thing.
Uh-huh.
And the interrogator tried to get me to tell him what I had done in the Pacific.
Oh, sure.
And I wasn't going to because we were considered not prisoners of war, but war criminals by the Japanese.
Right.
And I didn't know, maybe the Germans would like to gain some brownie points by sending some Doolittle Raiders over to them. I realized later they would not have done that.
Oh.
Because at that time, the only physical connection they had was by submarine.
Yes.
And that little space was too valuable to send us
That's
to
right.
Japan.
Well, you lucked out again.
Yeah.
Well, now 22 months in incarceration. That's a long, long time.
Yeah, it's a long time.
Was it boring?
Well, you know, it's nothing like the boys suffered from over there in these days,
Yeah.
where they're in solitary confinement.
Right.
We were in barracks, and we worked as hard as we could to give them all the reason possible to have more and more guards to keep us in there.
Sure.
We dug tunnels, and we got guys out through the front gate and working all the time.
Right.
We figured we had nothing to contribute, but this harassment of
That's
our
all you
guards.
could do, sure.
Yeah, so we did that. We had a big escape committee, and we got boys out, but most of them were captured. But we were there for the Great Escape by the British over the barbed wire. The British pulled off the Great
Right.
Escape, but they were all British.
Yeah.
And they got 2 men to Sweden in the Great Escape and 1 down through France into Spain. So they got 3 men out of 80 out of the place. Hitler ordered them all to be shot, and they sent 55 urns of ashes back into the prison camp. For some reason, some of the people that captured the British boys didn't kill them, and sent only 55, and there were about 20 some left that they didn't kill, sent back in.
How about that?
Yeah, that was the story of the Great Escape.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was a great. And of course, they made a movie out of it and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
During your captivity, besides your harassing the guards and keeping them busy and making the necessity of bringing more personnel in to keep you in control, did you have a radio?
Before the war ended, we had 3 radios in our camp. Pieces would be sent in. Our Air Force had a system. About every so many men would get a notice that if they should be captured, their Aunt Ellie from Springfield, Illinois would be writing them letters, and here's your code. So you could decipher Aunt Ellie's letter. And Ellie could tell you when a package was coming over that would have something in there, part for a radio, money, escape things, maps.
Yeah.
And our boys would be out in the mail room when this came in, looking for certain, and Aunt Ellie's package would be shunted to one side and gotten out of there and into the camp with the German, the Nazis, of course, had people watching open these packages, because they didn't want that sort of thing to get into the camp.
Of course.
But it was a game of cat and mouse,
Yeah.
and our side won. At one time, we had 3 radio receivers in our camp, getting news from the BBC every night.
Now you must have had to hide those.
Oh, they were hidden all over.
Oh, yeah.
One funny thing about that, one of those radios, one of our best receivers, we had sort of a hobby show to let the Germans know what wonderful things we could make.
Yeah, so
and this
busy.
particular receiver was in the cabin of a beautiful sailboat that the boys had made. And the Germans would come in when we had this display of
This
hobby.
model.
And one of the things they admired was this beautiful sailboat. And in the cabin was our best receiving radio. See, that's how we got our kicks, that sort of thing.
Of course.
Sure.
Oh.
And
Those
the
are-
spars were antennas, you know. And
Right.
The whole thing was a wonderful radio receiver.
This is, and things like this were morale boosters
Oh,
too.
sure.
It kept you alive and kept your spirits up.
Absolutely.
And how about cigarettes and food and so forth?
Cigarettes could come in. I didn't smoke, but boys would get those, and they were good for trade for things, you know.
Sure.
And,
Candy, chocolate
yeah.
candy bars, things like that.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh
lots
gosh.
of that going on.
Well, that's just a tremendous story, and of course, I suppose you kept a calendar or a chart, and did you keep a tally?
I got the job of hiding contraband goods that came in.
Oh.
And we did a lot of things with them between walls. We even buried some. And I was in charge of a building, and my roommate and I had the end room, just the 2 of us with double-decker bed. And as your door opened, there was a window there, but just a solid wall. Mm-hmm. And our boys came in and moved our bunk out, put the back wall on hinges so that it would open up. And that was a closet where we had escaped civilian clothes, maps, currency, everything in there.
I see.
And every once in a while, the Germans would rout the people out of a building and make a thorough search. And one day they did that to ours, and they must have measured or something, because they figured that wall is where it should be. They found it.
Oh my God.
And they sent me and my roommate to the cooler for destruction of Reich property.
Oh.
I told this German officer, I said, what do you mean destruction? We improved the room, we put a closet back there. He didn't have a sense of humor.
No.
We spent 2 weeks in solitary confinement for
2
destruction of Reich property.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. Well, you had to get your laugh somewhere.
Oh, I
And they actually, after a few days, they let our people send some extra food back to us. They were only feeding us some soup, but they let our people put foods in a box and send it back to us.
Now, the officers were kept together, and enlisted men were kept separate.
Yeah.
So you had a, now did you have any British? Were there any British?
The North Lager, where the Great Escape was all British.
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
we
in
were all
with you,
American.
in with you, were there any, no British in with you? I see. Well,
There was one British padre, a man of religion,
Yeah.
who came in for services
Sure.
and things like, but that's the only thing.
I'll be darned. Have you kept in touch with camp mates that
sure.
you met?
Unfortunately, most of them are gone now.
They're mostly
Yeah.
gone now, yeah.
Not too many to contact anymore.
Right. I just wondered if that group had reunions in peacetime.
They did. They didn't have them like as often as we did, but the prisoners of war did have reunions.
Right.
And actually, at one time, old Glimwitz, who was the head of the German guards at our camp, was invited and came over to a reunion in Dayton, Ohio.
Is that so?
Yeah, I was at the reunion.
That must have been something too, I should say.
We used to have them once a year for several years. They had 'em.
Well, that's the thing, you know, our ranks are thinning pretty rapidly.
Yeah.
But you're such an important link, Tom, from way early peacetime through the Depression, your college career, everything that you have done. When you came back to the States, you were finally liberated in August of '45?
Yeah. I went down to Kelly Field or Randolph Field, and I actually got out there was a process that took several weeks.
Right.
I think it was I was there about 6 weeks, about the middle of October of '45 when I got out.
Did you have to be debriefed?
No.
Did they interrogate? I mean, you were.
Yeah.
Did they ask you to tell your story to the
I don't
military
think so.
here? No, I'll be darned. Well, that's so from Kelly Field. Then you were discharged.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And did you stay in the reserve?
I did for a short time, and then I found it interfered with my work. I had an accounting business,
Yes.
and I just more or less drifted away from it.
How did you come to Cincinnati?
Well, I had people in Dayton. I had a brother and sister,
Oh,
and I had in Cincinnati. I had a lot of friends, so I just
sure,
came down here.
sure.
Family and friends in this area.
Where'd you meet your wife?
Met my wife when I came back from the Doolittle Tokyo raid.
Oh,
They gave me 2 weeks leave.
Yeah.
Remember,
yeah.
and a friend of mine had a cottage in southern Michigan near Dowagiac, not
Oh,
far
yeah.
from Niles, Michigan, those lakes in there. And they invited me up there, and I went up there, and for female companionship, his wife brought her cousin, who lived in Dowagiac, out to the island.
Uh-huh.
And that was
your wife.
Yeah.
Isn't that great? What a wonderful thing, I should say. So then you came back to Cincinnati and you started a business.
Yeah.
Your own business, accounting business, and
Yeah.
CPA and all that sort of thing. Well, that's just amazing.
Retired from that in '82. So
82?
I've been retired now for
You've been
20
out 25
Yeah.
years. My goodness
I got
sakes.
tired of figures.
Now you had 2 sons.
2 sons, right.
Yeah, yeah. What ages are they?
They're both in Europe right now.
They're both in Europe, right?
My son John, who works at Murray State University, is over there now. No, he's leaving in about a week or so.
Okay.
I'm ahead of my game. He's going over there for this till the middle of December. He'll be with these students over there. His office is in Regensburg. and he teaches a German class to them while they're there. And my son Gary, who's a musician, is over there now with a band. They're playing first in Sweden and Norway, and then down in Germany and down through Europe. And he's with the Beach Boy who wrote all the music.
Oh, yeah.
What Brian?
Brian.
Brian.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
They've been playing. He's known Brian for years.
Yes.
And he brings Gary along for his
Isn't
music.
that?
Yeah.
Oh, that's very, very interesting. Well, anything else that comes to mind? We've got time for a little bit more. If you've got any thoughts or any amusing incidences.
Amusingness.
Now you've been so fortunate to have close contact with the Doolittle family.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since the general's death,
Yeah.
well, before that and then afterwards.
Yeah, and just this year, what was it, a month ago?
Yeah.
John Doolittle, that's the boss's son and his wife, and his daughter. What's her name? See, I go blank on names.
Well,
She's the writer.
She wrote the biography.
Boy, if she knew I forgot her name,
Oh, my
she'd
God.
shoot me. I'm not going to forget it. It's
All right.
well, anyway. They invited Dick Cole,
Yes.
who was Doolittle's co-pilot, and me, and we went up to Alaska, and we had a wonderful time up there.
What did you do up there?
Well,
Just
we
kinda
went
hang
into
out?
Fairbanks, and we took trips. We rented cars, of course, and we
Yes.
took trips around the beautiful parts of Alaska. It's
Wow.
just wonderful.
I should
And
say.
that was a month or so ago.
Yeah.
And we were up there for about 10 days.
Where does Cole live?
Dick Cole lives in a town called Comfort, Texas, about 60 miles north of San Antonio.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And he was Doolittle's co-pilot.
Yes. Yes. Well, you
If,
guys.
if that girl found out I couldn't remember her name, she'd shoot me. So,
Well,
we won't tell her.
No, I promise. I won't tell her. I'll give you a call. I've got the book at home.
I'm getting addle
Yeah,
brain.
well-
You got her book.
I've got her book. I read the book. I read the biography. I have a friend here in town who was a friend of the Doolittles and got a signed
She
copy.
would shoot me if she knew I
Oh
couldn't
my
come
gosh,
up with her
yes.
name.
Yeah.
Terrible.
Well, now you're going to go to China.
Well, if I can get able to, I'm not going anywhere till I get rid of this problem I've got.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope it doesn't mean.
I thought maybe they'd operate right away, but the Veterans Hospital said they were going to put me through some kind of a treatment thing.
Oh, good.
But I hate to trust that. I get way over there and this flares up again.
Yes, I know. I know.
So I don't know what I'll do.
Now you've had trips to Europe, peacetime since then.
Last year I went to Europe.
Last year you went to Europe. You've been honored in Britain and France,
Yeah.
and I can just imagine how people.
We had a nice ceremony on Omaha Beach with a nice
Right.
ceremony.
Did you ever get to meet President Reagan, Ronald Reagan?
No, I never met him.
Have you met any presidents since that time? You never met.
Oh, I met one of the Bushes.
Oh, you did. Senior.
Yeah, I met the senior.
Senior.
Yeah.
Number 41.
Yeah, I met
Okay.
him.
Yeah. Well, I'll bet you guys said. Did he realize who you were? Did he realize that?
Oh,
you
sure.
Yeah.
That's what. Yeah.
Well, and then of course with his experience as being shot down
Yeah.
as a Navy pilot in the
Right.
Pacific,
Right.
so you guys really had
Right.
so much in common besides who
Right.
you are. That's wonderful.
And, I think he talked at this luncheon. We just happened to be in Nevada, Las Vegas,
Las Vegas.
at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
And he talked at this luncheon where we were, and then we all went up.
Wow. Well, that's wonderful. Well, you've been a shining star, Tom, in American history, and
I'm getting a little dim.
I don't mean that happens to all of us. But I don't mean that as empty flattery.
It's
because
forgetting names that drives me crazy.
I know it.
I
Isn't it
know
awful?
people that I've known for 50 years.
Oh,
I
yeah.
can't.
I know, and we've always been so proud of our memories, you know, and I'll never forget good old what's his name, you know, sort of a thing. Well, you've just you've been such a wonderful shining example, not only as a hero with Lieutenant Colonel Doolittle at that time, and that's an interesting story too, how he jumped from Lieutenant Colonel to General.
Never a full colonel.
Never a full colonel. But we want to thank you for that, and thank you for your time. And again, I know there are other stories that we haven't covered, but maybe that can be for another interview sometime. I'd love to get into that with you. But be sure and express to your sons how much, and they know how much you are loved and admired, particularly here in Cincinnati, and your friend Tony Michael bringing you down here for this, and the great guys on the west side with the west side, the Chevy Kiwanis Club over there. They've been most supportive, and we just are very, very fortunate to know you and to love you as we do, and admire you, and we wish you many more. This happy birthday coming up on the 10th of July, and big number 91, and we're just positive that there are many more for you coming up. And I want to thank you for all of this, and I think that we've done it without wearing him out too much. And God bless you. I hope you get your hip fixed.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We've had the great honor of having Thomas Carson Griffin here with us, and you're in the archives now, and you'll get a DVD of this, and also copies are sent to the Library of Congress, and one kept here in the local library.
Great.
Thank you again, Tom. God
Thank
bless. Okay.
Yeah, we're privileged to have with us Major Tom Griffin. Give you a little bit of his background. He was born in Green Bay, Wisconsin. He later went and graduated from the University of Alabama. Of course, skipping quite a bit of history in there, then he was a member of the Doolittle Raiders. Now, those of you who are not quite familiar with the Doolittle Raiders, they're a squadron of planes there that first bombed Tokyo there in Japan. I understand Mr. Griffin volunteered for a secret mission, and at that time he didn't know what that mission was, but he wanted to be part of whatever they had planned. As you know, he was a navigator from B-25, and there were 16 planes that were going to take off from carrier Hornet. There's never been a bomber that ever took off from a carrier before. And this is a great experience for him. There were 16 planes, and he was a navigator on plane number 9, I believe it was, that took off from the carrier Hornet. Now these guys, they knew when they took off that they would not be coming back because they never had enough gas in their planes to return to the carrier. So, can you imagine taking off from a plane, or taking off from a ship there, and knowing that you're not going to have enough gas to get back? I understand that they had tentative plans to land in China. However, there's quite a few of them ran out of gas before they hit China. And Mr. Griffin's plane was one of them. Anyway, I'll let him tell you all about what happened and what led up to that. But I do know that later on he participated in the invasion of Italy, and he was shot down over Sicily, where he was captured by the Germans and held for 18 months as prisoner of war until the end of the war. Let's welcome Major Tom Griffin.
lot of people have asked me about a recent trip I made with another Doolittle Raider and a bunch of the old Flying Tigers and the boys that flew over the hump from India into China during World War II. The Chinese government invited us over there to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the successful end of World War II. And about a dozen old Flying Tigers accepted the invitation, and about 15 of the men that flew over the hump, well, that's the Himalayan mountains there, so many of them lost their lives flying those supply planes over from India into China. And there's 17 of the Doolittle Raiders is still alive, and I was very surprised when they invited us. We're scattered all over the country, there's 17 of us, but only 2 of us accepted the invitation. Dick Cole, who lives down in Texas, was Jimmy Doolittle's co-pilot on this particular mission. He and I were the only 2 that accepted the invitation to go to China, and it was really a wonderful opportunity to see that country and see what they're doing. We're just going to town. This is a country of 1,300,000,000 people, and the communists have turned the economy over to the free enterprise people, you might say, and they're just going to town. You know, when you go into stores, how many articles you pick up that say made in China. Well, they're just going to town in that country. We were there for almost 3 weeks, and we were in the principal cities for several days that wined and dined us and flew us, and we really rolled out the red carpet for us on this trip. Beside the 30-some veterans that showed up, about enough of our families, children and grandchildren came along, so we had almost 90 in our party altogether. And they took care of us and flew us all over the country, wined and dined us, and it was just a wonderful experience. The cities of China are just amazing, skyscrapers everywhere. I was over there in '82 with some Doolittle Raiders, and they were just starting to build skyscrapers in some of their cities. But the change in 20-some years has just been amazing. This is one of the great powers in the world in the future, folks. You might just as well know it, that 1,300,000,000 hard-working, industrious people. Well, we did have a good time, and I took one of my sons with me, and he had a great time on this trip too. I was amazed that of the 17 Doolittle Raiders still alive, only 2 of us accepted the invitation. I don't know why, but half of them were in good enough shape as I am to have made the trip. They didn't choose to go. Well, I get back to the original 80 men, and what we did about 60-some years ago in the mission that became known as the Doolittle Tokyo Mission. Those of you who have read about it in your history books know that after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, our country and our allies were in a very bad way everywhere in the world. The Russians were being pushed back in their country to their principal cities of Moscow and Leningrad and Stalingrad. Rommel was down in the summer of '42, driving the British back towards Cairo. And in the Pacific, after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, you all remember they went on to take over. They made the Pacific Ocean a Japanese lake, you might say. They took over places like Wake and put a large army on the Philippines, and were in the process in that springtime of '42 of defeating our forces there. They went on to Singapore and Hong Kong and down into the Dutch East Indies with the rubber and oil they could get there. And it looked for all the world like the next big thing they were going to take would be Australia. Well, right after the attack on Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt told his military advisors that he wanted them to come up with some idea to strike back at Japan. The main emphasis of our forces immediately after Pearl Harbor, we were at war with Germany, was against Europe. But of course we had to take care of the Pacific at the same time. And he wanted them to come up with some idea to strike back at Tokyo as soon as possible to retaliate for that raid on Pearl Harbor. And that was a very difficult thing for our military people to think of because we didn't have any fields close enough to Japan for our planes to get to Japan and Tokyo. But a naval officer noticed an experiment being run in January of '42, just about a month after Pearl Harbor. He was at Norfolk, Virginia, a naval base there, and he saw where they were doing an experiment. They put two Mitchell B-25 twin-engine bombers on the deck of a carrier and sailed out in the ocean, and these two Mitchell bombers took off from the carrier deck. And that gave him the idea for what we later did. He came back to Washington, D.C. and told his boss that it might be possible to put a whole squadron of these twin-engine Army bombers on the deck of a carrier and have them take off and bomb Japan. The carrier would have to get close enough for them to bomb Japan. Hap Arnold was the head of the Air Force at that time, and he had on his staff a young lieutenant colonel named Jimmy Doolittle, who just happened to be one of the great aviators of the first half of the 20th century. Jimmy Doolittle was absolutely the right man for him to call in and ask him if this idea was feasible, if it would be possible for us to take fully loaded twin-engine Army bombers off the deck of a carrier and fly over and bomb our enemy in Japan. And Doolittle came back in 2 days and he said, yes, with certain modifications, the B-25 Mitchell bomber could do this trick. And so Hap Arnold handed this over to Jimmy Doolittle. Now it just happened that the reason I got in on this, I was in a B-25 outfit up in the Pacific Northwest in December of '41 when the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor. And all during the year of 1941, we had been getting these new B-25 Mitchell bombers to replace our old B-18s and B-23s. And at the time of the Pearl Harbor raid, we were fully equipped with B-25, the new B-25 Mitchell bombers. And we were the only outfit in the Air Force that was so fully equipped. So when Jimmy Doolittle said the only plane we had that could possibly do this job was the B-25, they came to us for the planes and the personnel to man these planes for this mission. After December the 7th, '41, we flew out over the Pacific Ocean for about 6 weeks because, of course, we didn't know what the Japanese were going to do after they attacked Pearl Harbor. People on the West Coast were very nervous. They were afraid that the Japanese were going to come on, as they could have, and done a lot of damage on the Pacific coast there. But the Japanese did not have any plans of that kind at that time, as we all know now. And they went on their way, taking over the rest of the Pacific Ocean. Well, they sent us, after 6 weeks of searching out over the Pacific and finding absolutely nothing, they sent us to South Carolina in late January. And when we got there, they told us that they were planning an unusual mission with unusual elements of danger connected with it. And they wanted to warn us about that and ask for volunteers. And I think, as far as I can remember, the whole group volunteered. After all, we were at war, and I think all of us in the bombing outfit figured we were going to have some dangerous missions ahead. So they just took 20 crews of us and sent us down to Eglin Field in Florida. And when we got down there, Jimmy Doolittle showed up, and we found that he was a very dynamic leader. I don't know if you know much about the history of Jimmy Doolittle. Doolittle as a flyer, but he was an amazing aviator. And besides being a daredevil, he was an odd combination because the Air Force, when he first became a second lieutenant in the Air Force, saw something special with Jimmy Doolittle, and they sent him to MIT. And he received one of the first degrees in aeronautical engineering from MIT. So besides being a daredevil aviator, he was a very smart, brainy fellow. And as we were to find out, he was a great leader. He told us the first day that we met him at Eckland Field that the most important thing that we were to remember was secrecy. He said, if the mission we're going to go on is known by our enemies, we'll never get there. This has to be very secret. I want you to contact your families, tell them you're going to be gone for 2 months, and you'll get in touch with them as soon as you get back. Everything had to be very quiet. And the training period for the boys to learn how to get these B-25 Mitchell bombers up in the air at 400 feet took place on a landing strip back in the Eggler complex there. And the boys worked on that. The B-25 Mitchell bomber took a minimum, according to the book, of 1,500 feet to get airborne. But our boys had to learn to get these planes up in the air at 400 feet, which is all we were going to have on the deck of a carrier. And all of the training down there at Eggland Field were with empty planes, that is, a light gas load and no bomb load. Now, when we actually got on the carriers for our takeoffs, we had a ton of bombs. We had 300 and some extra rubber tanks of gas because of the length of the flight that we were planning. We actually, just a slight correction, we never had any plans of flying back to the carrier after we bombed our targets in Japan, because there was no chance of landing those twin-engine bombers back on the deck of the carrier. From the very beginning, we planned to fly on, after we bombed targets in Japan, we were going to fly on to a field in free China, which was supposed to be ready for us. And it was at such a distance that we were just hoping that we could get there with the extra gas we were carrying. At the end of about 2 weeks into April, we had done all of our training down at Eggland Field. We flew out to San Francisco, and our newest carrier, the Hornet, had just docked there the day before. And we landed on the landing strip there, 20 planes and 20 crews. And the Navy told Doolittle at that time that they couldn't accommodate 20 of our planes. They could only arrange to have 16 of our planes on the deck of the carrier. So he had 20 crews all trained and 20 planes all ready to go. So he stood at the end of the runway that day as we landed. He landed the first plane. And he would shout up to the pilot, "Is there everything okay with your plane?" And the pilot, not knowing what an important question this was, if he didn't just give him this, everything was okay. If he said, "Well, my left engine is rough," or just any minor thing like that, that's how he eliminated 4 planes. He eliminated the planes, but we took the crews with us for security reasons as much as anything else. But actually, there were good labor pools to dip in during the 18 days we were going to be at sea to make some personnel changes on the crews we had. So it was a good thing we had those extra boys with us. We left on the 1st of April of 42. It was going to be an 18-day trip across the Pacific. We had 2 cruisers and 4 destroyers with us. Now, the night before, Bull Halsey flew in from Hawaii and met with Jimmy Doolittle at a hotel room in downtown San Francisco. Bull Halsey was going to be in command of the task force taking us across the Pacific. And they talked over this mission, and among other things, Halsey said he would get the task force within 400 miles of Japan if it was at all possible. So Well, one very happy thing that happened with the Doolittle boys, we got word in the afternoon after our planes were all on the deck of the carrier that we could go into town and have the night on the town and to be at a certain pier the next morning for a boat that would take us back out to the carrier. And believe it or not, we all showed up at that pier the next morning, went back out to the carrier. After, I won't go into any details about our it was a long, happy night. We left the next day. The Navy people, we had been very close mouthed as we got on the deck of the carrier. They were pumping us, wondering what they were doing, having Army bombers on the deck of their carrier. They thought that their beautiful new carrier was going to be used as a cargo ship to take a squadron of Army bombers probably to Hawaii. And we wouldn't tell them anything. We were very close mouthed. And they were very unhappy with us. Until we got out about half an hour past the Golden Gate Bridge the next morning, and the loudspeaker came on and said, this task force is going to go to Japan, and the Army boys are going to bomb targets in Japan. And of course, a tremendous cheer went up then, and the relationship between the Navy personnel and the Doolittle Raiders improved 1,000%. They got so friendly with us that they ended up taking most of our money away from us and pocketed it across the Pacific. After we were at sea for about a week, we rendezvoused with Bull Halsey. He had the other carrier, the Enterprise. And he had two more cruisers and 4 destroyers. And he was in command of the whole task force. And as we went across the Pacific, we had our meetings every morning. Every one of our crews were assigned specific targets in different parts of Japan. 11 of us, however, of the 16 planes were going to bomb targets in the immediate Tokyo area. One plane was going to bomb the shipping yard down in the southern part of Tokyo Bay at Yokohama. And we had planes going to Kobe, Osaka, and Nagoya, hitting targets there. That's how our 16 planes were arranged. As we crossed the Pacific, our planes took up the deck of the Hornet, the flight deck of the Hornet. So the Navy planes were down on the hangar deck and couldn't be used until our planes cleared that flight deck. And only the planes from the Enterprise flew cover and reconnoiter up ahead. You have to understand, the Pacific Ocean was under the control of the Japanese at this time. And this task force was very vulnerable. There were many high-ranking naval officers who were very much opposed to this task force being risked at that time. 2 carriers and 4 cruisers and 8 destroyers were a mighty big force for our side to have at that time in the Pacific Ocean. And we could have been a Japanese force of 2 or 3 times that size. And many high-ranking naval officers were very much opposed to this mission of ours. We even had a couple of days in the middle of the Pacific, in the morning, when we were told if the task force ran into a Japanese force that day, our planes would simply be thrown overboard. So the Navy planes could be brought up from the hangar deck below and help to protect the task force. That situation prevailed for a couple of days. And then in our morning briefing, they said, well, we're close enough now, so if the task force is intercepted, you fellas will take off and you can reach Japan and bomb your targets. And you'll be out of gas about that time. So if that had happened, if they had intercepted us on that day, we would have been prisoners of war in Japan. But this did not happen until the morning of the 18th day. The evening of the 18th day, or late afternoon, we were going to take off on our mission. And early that morning, our task force went between some Japanese picket ships out about 650 miles from Japan. Now, we had hoped to get to a spot 400 miles from Japan before we took off. And when we figured our mileage and our gasoline, if we took off from 400 miles off, we were going to be very lucky to reach our airfield in China, which was supposed to be ready for us. Now, we were 250 miles further out, and Halsey sent word over immediately that the Army boys were to take off. It just took them probably 5 or 10 minutes to sink these Japanese picket ships, but they had time to radio into mainland Japan that the task force was coming. So the Japanese knew that this task force was on the way. And according to their calculations, they knew the range of Navy planes and knew that this task force had to come another 24 hours to get close enough to Japan for the Navy planes to do any damage. Well, in the meantime, our long-range Army planes were taking off 650 miles per hour. We started taking off at about 8 o'clock in the morning, and plane number 9 was very happy to see 8 planes successfully negotiating that takeoff. It was a morning with very high seas and solid overcast. High seas made the flight deck pitch and roll, which wasn't too good. But the wind, we had about 25-knot wind, which was wonderful. With the carrier going full force into the wind, the carrier could go about 30 knots and do about 25 knots of wind. It meant that we were taking off into what amounted to almost a gale force wind, between 50 and 60 knots of wind. And our planes, even though they were overloaded, between 15 and 2,000 pounds more than the book said the plane should ever carry for takeoff, with all of that wind, we all got off at 400 feet. We took off from a line 400 feet from the bomb. And plane number 9, my plane, by the time we were ready to take off, we had another 200 feet clear. But they didn't let us use that. We all were dragged up to that same line, 400 feet from the bottom. And the reason was, the takeoff was a very tight squeeze. We only had 6 feet of clearance from our right wingtip to the island. And that gave us 6 feet from our left wheel to the edge of the flight deck. So we had to stay right on the line as much as possible. If we went 6 feet right or left, our takeoff line was over. So the shorter the run, the safer we were. And as long as everybody was getting off, everybody was dragged up to that same line, and they had 400 feet to get off, and we'd all make it. The only casualty of that morning was the 16th plane. As the sailor boys were dragging the planes up to the line, that big rope, and dragging them up to this takeoff line, one of the sailor boys stepped back into a prop and lost his arm. That was the only casualty in the takeoff of the Doolittle. We didn't know about that, except we were in China. We heard about it. Plane number 9 got to Tokyo, the southwestern part of Tokyo, right after noon, between 12 and 1 o'clock. And we saw where 8 of our planes had bombed targets in Tokyo earlier, fire and smoke and all of that sort of thing. And anti-aircraft flak was all over the sky. The anti-aircraft guns were ready for us, but they didn't shoot anybody down. All of our planes went in, bombed the targets in Japan and Tokyo and got away. And our planes that went to other targets in different parts of the islands successfully bombed their targets. After bombing our targets, we flew in incidentally right at rooftop level. And that made it very difficult for the Japanese anti-aircraft to get us, and very difficult for the pursuits that they set out to get us. And the result was that they didn't shoot anybody down. I think one reason that the pursuits didn't shoot us down, the B-25 Mitchell bomber that we had were the first ones, the B-25Bs off the line. And they didn't have any provisions for tail guns in their planes. So Doolittle, with considerable foresight, had broomsticks cut off and painted black. And we each had two menacing looking broomsticks protruding from the tail section. And I'm sure they had some of their broomsticks flying up our tail ends. At any rate, we didn't shoot any of us down. We flew after bombing our targets. We flew back out to sea as though we were going back to a carrier to confuse the defensive. And then we turned right and we paralleled the Japanese islands for the rest of the day. The flight itself, to give you some idea of how long this flight was, in plane number 9, my plane, from the time we took off, about 9 o'clock in the morning, until we ran out of gas over China, we were in the air for 15 and a half hours. We kept taking that same time forward. We bailed out at 12:30 at night in the storm over China. So it was a long, long flight. And if I don't run out of gas, I'll complete this whole story. We only had one, but we stayed right down on the deck all the way, which made it very difficult for the Japanese radar to pick us up. And they didn't pick any of our people up. 15 of our 16 planes flew the mission as we were told to do. We flew to China. One plane bombed his target in Tokyo and decided he didn't have enough gas to get to the field in China, so he flew across Japan. And he flew up to Vladivostok, Russia. Our allies, the Russians. And they spent the year, 15 months as house prisoners in Russia before they finally escaped from Russia. The other 15 of us flew on, and when we got down to the southern tip of the Japanese islands and headed across the China Sea towards China, the weather, which had been very nice after a couple of hours off the carrier, the overcast had cleared up, and we had a nice sunny day until late afternoon heading for China. We saw a big storm up ahead. And we, in our plane, we went up and took what we call a wind drift. And instead of having the anticipated easterly wind that we were going to be flying into, it would be a westerly wind. We were flying into a westerly wind, which was the usual wind at that time of the year. And what we had anticipated having, we had a strong tailwind. And that tailwind got all of our planes at least to the China coast. Before we ran into this 6 hours of a strong tailwind, most of us figured we were going to have to ditch someplace out of gas in the China Sea. We couldn't make the China coast. And of course, the American boys all have to have some kind of a plan, so we figured, well, we'll be running out of gas if we see a ship. We'll ditch next to the ship. And we all had our 45s, of course. If it was a friendly ship, we'd sail off with them. And if it was an enemy ship, we'd take it over. Right. You have to have a light at the end of the tunnel, you know. That was our way. But this strong tailwind we had for 5 or 6 hours, we all at least reached the China coast. Most of our planes were running out of gas, but about that. 4 of them ditched in the water right along the coast. Ted Lawson, who wrote the book 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, he tells how he saw a sandy beach and he put his wheels down. He was going to let them be bought out of gas, of course. And he put his wheels down and they hit as he was dragging it in, they hit the waves and tumbled in. They all lived, but they were all bummed up. If you wrote the book 30 Seconds Over Tokyo about that, some of you may have read that. Most of us, 11 of us, opted to pull up into the storm to 10,000 feet. Now, we couldn't talk between planes. We had taken off the heavy radio equipment out of our plane, so we all had to decide what we were going to do. And 11 of us pulled up into this storm and flew until we ran out of gas and bailed out. It was midnight now. Couldn't see our wingtips. We were in this storm. And we couldn't let down because there were mountains beneath us there that went up to 8,000 feet. So we all pulled up to 10, ran out of gas and bailed out. That's 55 men bailed out of 11 planes. One man was killed. About 5 men had minor non-death-threatening injury, broken bones of one kind or another. And the rest of us were very fortunate. My experience was the same as a lot of the others. When I bailed out, it was total darkness in the middle of a storm like that. And I fell a little way, pulled my ripcord, and my chute opened. And I had the most peculiar sensation that I was standing still, and the only thing moving was my chute. And that chute would go over here, and it would fold up. And I'd think, oh, I'm losing all my air. And then it would come up here, and it would go over here and fold up. But I was in a tremendous pendulum like that, which went on for quite some time. Thank you for the water.
Would you like to take a short break?
Well, if you want me to, sure. Where am I? I'm in a parachute. I'll tell you about my parachute and then if you want to take a break. Okay. So, as I got closer to the ground, my chute settled overhead, and the first indication I had up near the ground, a branch of a tree hit my face. And the next second, my shroud lines were just long enough for me to reach the ground. And I tried to pull the chute out of the tree, and I couldn't get it out. It was all tangled up. So I just unbuckled the belt and walked away. It was the middle of the night. And I ended up sitting up all night until the next day. There's long stories of what happened. Of 80 men, the Japanese captured 8 of our men. They executed 3 of them, put 5 in prison for life, which amounted to the end of the war. One of them died, and that was the rest of us were all okay. We had 1 man that died bailing out, and 2 men drowned trying to swim ashore. So I think we lost about 10 or 12 men that night. And that's all. The rest of us all, through the ensuing days, got help by the Chinese, who got us out of this territory, free China along the coast there, which was occupied by the Japanese into free China. Now, if you want to break off, I can go on for this later.
It's totally up to you.
What are you going to do like break up and
Right, makes sense.
Would you like to have something to eat instead of this?
Why don't we take a short break, 10 minutes? And then we'll go back and everybody will have their questions.
I'll even have my work.
Great.
The 8 men that they
Dark orange
captured,
donut?
they tried them in Japan, in Tokyo, and the court agreed that they weren't prisoners of war, they were war criminals. And they were all to be killed. For some reason, Hirohito actually intervened, and you have to understand the Japanese mind. He looked over the transcript of the case and said, well, shoot these 3 and put the other 5 in prison for life. And that's what they did. They took them back to Shanghai, and they shot the 3 of them. And of the 5 men that they put in prison, 4 of them lived through the war and came home. 1 of them died in terrible condition. Well, they were in solitary confinement most of the time. They were 3.5 years in prison. So they had a very bad time. They gradually got us out. Ted Lawson and some of those fellows who needed Ted Lawson had his leg taken off. We had a doctor that approached Doolittle when we were training down in Evansville, Florida. And surgeon, he said, you ought to take a doctor with you on this mission. And Doolittle said, well, okay, you'll qualify as an airman and I'll put you on one of the crews. And Doc White was on a cruise that ditched in the water about 3 miles from where Ted Lawson had his problems. And then Ted Lawson's crew was all bumped up. And in the sunny days, the Chinese, when they found out that Doc White was a doctor, got him together with that crew. And among other things, he took Ted Lawson's leg off that day. And he said, they did all that in Japanese territory, and the Chinese were able to fight for it. And the Japanese never did get them. They got out of there. We gradually got together back in Chongqing. And one of my greatest memories in Chongqing was one day about a half dozen of us were at headquarters there, Chiang Kai-shek's headquarters. When Madam Chiang Kai-shek found we were there, and she invited us out to her home, and we went out and had lunch. Madam Chiang Kai-shek, incidentally, she just died last year. She loved this country, went through college here, you know, and she died at the age of 105. She lived in a long island. After Chiang Kai-shek died, Formosa, she came back over here. But anyway, she invited about a half dozen of us, and we had lunch with her in her home there in Chongqing. And after we finished our lunch, the Generalissimo came in, and through an interpreter, he thanked us for honoring the Japanese. And then we all went out to the living room, and he hung the Chinese long on us, you know, that sort of thing. And, very pleasant memories of that. But when I went back in '82 on a trip through China, I asked the Chinese communists, of course, rule that country now, and I asked them, when we got to Chongqing, they said, is there anything in particular you want to see here? I said, I'd like to go back out to that home. I didn't have a camera when I was there before, and they put their heads together to see that the communists, you know, right, Chiang Kai-shek and people around China. So they weren't too fond of him. And so they put their heads together and they came back and said, well, that home is now a girls' school and we can't take it there. We left about 4 crews with the new 14th Air Force, which was just being formed in China at that time. And we got down to Kunming, where the Flying Tigers were. They were a colorful bunch of characters. They were still flying the non-Japanese planes about 10 to 1. And they said, we should join them, boy. They're $500 bills flying around. They got the regular officer's salary plus $500 for every Japanese plane they shot. That's big money in those days. About a month after we saw them in May, they were ordered to either join the American Air Force, 10th Air Force in China, or they could go home. Well, as it worked out, most of those men that had been Marine flyers or Navy flyers came back home and joined the whole organization. And some of the Army flyers stayed there and flew in China. We then flew over the hump into India, and we left 3 crews with the 10th Air Force in India. And the rest of us, about 30 some of us, got orders to come home. And in effect, what we did, I was one of those. We flew around the world. We bought Japan on the way, and then we went through China and India, across Africa to South America, and then back up. We got back up to Washington, D.C. sometime in June of '42. And he gave us 2 weeks vacation. 2 weeks vacation, and we were reassigned to new groups that summer. And in the fall of '42, the group I was assigned to was a twin-engine B-26 Marauder group. And they told us to fly the northern route to England. And we started off the 1st of October. We never sent a twin-engine group over that northern route that late in the season again. And in the course of about 3 or 4 weeks, we lost a half a dozen planes and crews in places like Labrador and Greenland. And we were weathered, in my plane, we were weathered into Greenland for 10 days. We got to Iceland and down to England. And when we got to England, we found that we were now in the 12th Air Force under the command of now the General Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle was a lieutenant colonel when he led us on our mission in the springtime of 42. And by the fall of 42, he was in command of the 12th Air Force in England, which was the Air Force was going in on the invasion of North Africa in November of 42. And we fed our group down to Oran, places like Oran and Algiers, and flew for Jimmy Doolittle in North Africa against Rama, mostly against shipping, taking supplies, trying to get supplies to Rama. And we bombed ports in Tunisia, such as Tunis and Sfax and Davies, where they had all their supplies backed up. And the Germans had a very strong Air Force presence there in that area, in Sicily and North Africa. And we ran into quite a beehive there. Our group was one of the first groups that got over there, fighting against the Germans. We had 5 Doolittle Raiders that were assigned to this particular group I was in. And we started fighting against Rommel in December of 42. And by July of 43, 2 of the 5 had been shot down and were killed. And 3 of us were shot down and were prisoners of the Germans. So we didn't last very long. I was shot down on July 4th of 43 over Sicily, a week before the invasion of Sicily and captured by the Germans. Well, I'll tell you an experience I had. It's a funny story. And I bailed. It was about noontime. We were bombing airfields in western Sicily near Catania. And we were the lead ship of about 40 B-26s. And our colonel was in the ship with us. And we were hit big time, and down we went. We bailed out. Our plane was on fire, and we all bailed out. It's a good thing when everything is that way, because there's no hesitation. You know you're not going to try to ride the plane down. You're going to get out of there as fast as you can. So that's what we did. And we had this unusual experience going down. ME-109 came at me, just missed me, and pulled up. I was in my chute, I was going down. And we had briefings after a number of our missions, in which men said they thought they saw German pursuits strafing our men going down in parachutes. But naturally, I was sure that that's what this guy was trying to do in his gunner jack. He would turn around and come back, and he made about half a dozen passes at me. He just missed me and just missed my chute. And I was having some words with him. But the interesting thing was, when I landed in a wheat field, I was surrounded by German soldiers and captured. And that afternoon, they took me into a German general's office in Catania. And I went in there. You have to give your name, rank, and serial number. That's required. I did that. I figured, well, what have I got to lose? And I said, Your General, do you give your pursuit boys permission to strafe us when we're coming down in chutes? It was against the rules of war. He heard me out, and I told him it was ME-109 guy, and I said, obviously his guns were jammed. And he heard me out, and he said, he was not trying to shoot you, he was taking a picture. So apparently this fellow had been sent up with the job of getting a picture of an American coming down in a parachute, and he happened to pick on me. He took the wind out of my sails.
Yeah.
That's more or less the story. The Doolittle raid itself great boost to the morale of the American people. Morale. It was the first good news we had in the war, anyway. Of course, they came out of it. And it had somewhat the opposite effect on the Japanese people because they had been told that enemy planes could never break through the defenses to bomb their cities. And here, 4 months after Pearl Harbor, a bright sunny noontime, we were bombing their cities. So they got shaken up by that a little bit. I think the first time began to doubt their leaders a little bit. The Japanese, not knowing how many more of these kind of nuisance raids they were going to have to put up with, brought back naval and air units from the war zones to beef up the defenses of Japan, so we had that effect on them. But the main effect of the Doolittle raid was this. Yamamoto, who was the head of the Japanese Navy, had been arguing in the high councils of Japan that they were making a big mistake by continuing to go south towards Australia. They were in the southern tribes, in the Philippines and the Dutch East Indies and things like that. He said, we've got to go across the Pacific and entice what's left of the American fleet out of Pearl Harbor and see if we can open up the west coast of America to attack. Now, this was Yamamoto's idea. He wasn't getting anywhere with this until the Doolittle raid. And 2 days after the Doolittle raid, he got the green light to do what he wanted to do. And he gathered together the biggest fleet he'd ever assembled. He had 4 carriers, battleships and cruisers and troop carriers, and they headed across the Pacific. And 6 weeks after our raid on Tokyo, they were going to take out the first little thing, which was the little island of Midway. And you all remember what happened at Midway. American Navy flyers sunk all 4 of their carriers, several other capital ships, and sent the Japanese back in the first great defeat, changed the whole Pacific War. From that time on, if you analyze the Pacific War, the Japanese were by and large on the defensive instead of on the offensive. So that little bit of irritation of the Doolittle raid had a considerable effect on the Pacific War. It gave us another year to produce carriers and all the other equipment of war, which we could produce much greater quantity than the Japanese, and ultimately led to nothing. So every little bit helps here and there. The Doolittle raid is little as it was, had a considerable influence on the Pacific. At least we built it up. Folks, that's the story of the Doolittle raid. Now, if any of you have any questions, or if I've left something out, I'll be happy.
Can you tell us about Jake the Shazer? Can you tell us about Jake the Shazer?
Jake the Shazer was one of the 8 men that the Japanese captured. And he was one of the 8 men, one of the 5 men that were spared. And he was in Japanese prison camp for 3.5 years. And during those 3.5 years, these boys were under particularly harsh treatment. He got awful treatment from the Japanese. But Jake got a hold of a Bible, and he read that Bible back and forth. Remember, they're all in solitary confinement. And Jake decided what these Japanese needed was Christianity. And he made a promise that if he ever got out of this alive, he would somehow go back to Japan and preach the word of Christianity to the Japanese. And the amazing part of Jake the Shazer's story is that he was alive when the war ended. He was one of the 4 men that came back. He went into a religious school. Seminary out in Oregon for a couple of years. And incidentally, at the same time he went through this seminary was a lady he married. And he went back to Japan after about 2.5 years after the end of the war. And he spent between 30 and 40 years in Japan. And he was responsible for the construction of several Christian churches in Japan. And somebody told me once that with the exception of MacArthur, he was the most famous American in Japan in those years. Jake had quite a career. Jake came back after the war ended. He was one of the four that lived through that. And he came to all of our reunions until 2 years ago, and now Jake is, he's still living, but they tell me he just is not very well. He hasn't come in the last 2 years. But he had an amazing story. They did write a book about it. Entitled Fort Came Home by a fellow named Lyons wrote that book. You see at the library, it's a very interesting book. There's so many unusual stories of the readers that talk after. Some of us ran into trouble over with the Nazis. Others flew over there. The fellow I was with in China this last month, Dick Cole, he was Doolittle's co-pilot, and he flew in the hump over the humps there in the Himalayas for over a year, bringing supplies into China. And he's quite a fellow too. Some good men.
Besides the flight crews, were there any other Army Air Corps men on the Hornet for support or any other functions?
No, we were the only Air Force men on there. Yeah.
And quickly, how did you finish the war? Were you still in the prisoner of war camp? How did you finish the war? Were you
The war in Europe ended the 8th of May, 1945, and we came home. And we were standing by, you see, in the summer of 45, before they dropped the atom bomb, they figured they were going to have to invade Japan. They had plans made to invade Japan in October in 45. And they had a lot of us standing by, just waiting orders to go over there. So, I'm all in favor of that atom bomb. It's a very nice thing to have. Yes, sir.
If the POW of the Germans, how were you treated?
By the Germans?
How were you treated?
Oh, the Germans followed the rules of the Geneva Convention for the treatment of prisoners as much as they could. They weren't always able to get the food to us that they should have been able to get to us, but they treated us as well as they could. And the biggest danger, a lot of the guards were elderly men that were put in uniform and sent down to prison camps like the ones we were in. And they often came from cities like Berlin or other German cities that had been hit by the bombers. They lost their homes and maybe some of their families. So they had certain rules, and you better obey them because if they had an excuse to shoot at you, they'd shoot at you. And at night, for example, if they could see a light coming out, our lights were left on until about 9:30 at night. They could see a light coming out through the shutters. They'd shoot on the other side of the barbed wire. They'd shoot right through the building. I had a friend that was hit that way. Badly hurt. So other than that, they followed the rules. And, of course, the last 3 months of the war, they couldn't get food to their own people, and we were down the food chain pretty far. So we did find out what hunger was the last 3 months before the war ended. But they did nothing like the Japanese. The Japanese, only about 50% of those men captured the Japs ever got home. The Germans, all about 5%, I think, which would be normal attrition. 5% of the prisoners died one way or another. So, yes.
How often do you get together with the other Raiders?
We have a reunion every year, and we had one last year. We were at Mystic, Connecticut, up there for the first time. And this next year, we're going to be at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. We meet the middle of April, around the 18th of April, the anniversary of our raid every year for about 4 days. And That should be about 60 years ago, 50 years ago, one of the cities where we had a reunion gave us 80 silver cups with our names engraved on them. And they were kept at the Air Force Academy. And cadets would bring those to our reunions every year. And whatever men were dead, the cups were turned over to their guys. Right now, only 17 cups are upright in that display. And the Air Force Academy in Colorado have had those all these years. But this year, the Air Force Museum in Dayton has gotten a hold of those cups. They're going to have them up there and display them up there. And as a result of that, they're going to have us there next April for our reunion with our new cups with our cups. It's a nice tradition. Well, folks, there's no other questions, but that's the story of the news of the way I hope I told you.